Welcome to Psychology of Pilgrimage. In this episode, I am joined by Christopher Robinson, who is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and the creator of the Last Deployment Project. Chris, it's nice to see you today and to have some time to talk about your initiative that you've started called the Last Deployment Project. I first saw information on LinkedIn about the project, and immediately I was drawn to the work you're doing because I do a lot of interviews with people and phenomenological research, which is really grounded in people's experiences from their own point of view. And so there was an immediate resonance with the type of work that you're doing in capturing oral histories. And then the second part of why I was really interested to talk to you has to do with the work that I've been doing on battlefield pilgrimages, particularly interviews with people who are veterans of the global war on terror, many of whom are expressing similar themes as to what you are extrapolating from your work. And I think that this conversation will be really helpful for both me, but listeners and viewers to better understand some of the motivations for why veterans, GWAT veterans, are going on pilgrimages, and some of the questions and existential issues that they're grappling with while they're on their pilgrimages or while they're visiting very large military cemeteries or war memorials. I think your work can really inform our understanding of that. So it's really nice to be able to have some time today to speak with you. I'd love to hear more about who you are and what the Last Deployment Project is.
Well, thank you for wanting to sit down with me as well. I really appreciate any chance I get to just get the name of the project out there. I've been wanting to do that for a long time, and the last 6 months I've finally been managing to do that. Just getting awareness that this is something that I'm doing, something that's happening. But yeah, so Chris Robinson, born, mostly raised in Southeast Louisiana. Spent some time in Texas, some time in Northern Virginia. Uh, graduated from Southeastern. I got my bachelor's in English in 2016, and then I got my master's in history in 2023. And in August of this year, I'll be starting my PhD program at University of Southern Mississippi up in Hattiesburg. And yeah, after about 3 days after I graduated with my bachelor's back in 2016, 3 days after that, I was in Parris Island, South Carolina for Marine Corps recruit training. Spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, got out in April 2020 on terminal leave. And I was a 0352 anti-tank missileman, infantryman, basically anti-tank infantryman. And yeah, I spent 4 years doing that with 2nd Line Reconnaissance Battalion. Deployed once in December 2018 to July 2019 to the Mediterranean Persian Gulf. It wasn't a very eventful deployment. Just sat on a boat most of the time, waiting for something to happen that nothing ever really happened. And then came back, picked up a new batch of junior Marines, or boots as we call them, even though we're not supposed to say that anymore, but that's what we call them. And then yeah, I got out, went back to school, started working on my master's, and yeah, 14 months to the day that I got out of the Marine Corps. I think it was either 14 or 15 months. I think it was 14 months. A lot of those junior Marines that we had picked up when we got back from deployment would be deployed with the 24th MEU, and they would be in Kabul, Hamid Karzai International Airport, Afghanistan, for the 2021 withdrawal and evacuation. But you want me to get into how I started the project and all that, and like the inspiration behind it?
Yeah. I mean, I think you've set the stage well in terms of the timeline, and certainly your personal connection with these Marines who in 2021 find themselves in Kabul. So please go ahead and launch into the project and what you're doing with that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it was fall 2022, going into my second to last semester with the master's program at Southeastern. And I was working on my thesis. And originally, my thesis was going to be on the evolution of modern American public education. I did quite the 180. And but getting into around September timeframe, I was thinking more and more about, I'm like, I find this interesting, but do I find it interesting enough to like really sit down and write a 60 to 100 page paper on this topic? And I was being thinking like, I'm not sure if I can pull that off. And my mother actually mentioned a job opening that she had seen. I'm not sure where she saw, but she told me about it for the Air Force, wanting an oral historian in Montgomery, Alabama, to interview uh, Air Force service members who were coming back from their deployments to Montgomery. Yeah, but obviously I wasn't going to apply for that job at the time because the minimum education requirement was a master's, which I didn't have just yet. I don't know if maybe they would put me on probation period. I don't know, but at the same time, I couldn't afford to move to Montgomery anyway. And yeah, so that kind of got the wheels in my head turning. And I had known about oral history, never really looked into it. I understood that it was a discipline within historiography and things of that nature, but I started to think more and more about it, and then I started to think about the the withdrawal, which while the withdrawal was happening, especially the evacuation, to my shame, I didn't really pay too much attention to it at the time. One, because it was just, I'd say it made me angry, it just made me uneasy, it made me uncomfortable. Mostly because I think the fact that I just wasn't in the Marine Corps anymore, that I had gotten out like a year plus beforehand. And I was also, there was a hurricane that was coming through at the end of that, I think right at the end of that month, Hurricane Ida. And then I was also getting married at the time as well. So it was a lot of things stacked on top of each other. But it was always in the back of my mind, especially August 26th when the attack at Abbey happened and I heard about the bombing. That made me really uneasy. I started texting all the guys that I knew. I'm like, hey, is anybody we know over there? And they're like, yeah, man, our old company's there. I'm like, well, crap. And I sent a couple of texts out to guys that I figured were over there. And one of them, I think, was Greg Whalen. Uh, he was one of my juniors. And he had actually gotten chopped over to 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, and he was with them in HKIA. And he said, yeah, we're good. Everybody's good. And then didn't think too much about it beyond that. But again, come September, getting into October 2023, I start talking to one of my professors at Southeastern, Dr. Keith Finley, who's a great guy. Loved working with him. Marine veteran himself, also Marine infantry veteran back in the 90s. Having his perspective was great, and his encouragement really. I was asking, I was like, do you think this is something that's feasible? Do you think I could pull this off? And he's like, yeah, as long as you put the work in and you have the connections you say you have, I think you can pull it off. And the fact that they're willing to talk. So I went ahead with that, scrapped everything that I had done before that. And by the end of October, I had done my first interview. And then by December, I had done a full 10 interviews. Most of those were with guys that I had known personally, a lot of those being my junior Marines. And I used that as kind of like the basis for my thesis, which I called The Last Deployment Project, Voices from HKIA. And used with that, among other things, I graduated in August 2023, and I've kind of just been carrying on since then. I actually just counted this morning. I've done 67 interviews so far, representing most of the major elements that were present, major military elements that were present on HKIA, and a few more besides. And yeah, basically, as the project has grown and evolved, The end goal of the project is to create an archive specifically for the withdrawal from Afghanistan, full of stories of the veterans who were present to witness that, participate in that, support that in any kind of way. Uh, yeah, that's the big goal. The ongoing thing is, and that's just going to go until I run out of people to talk to. So, as many people as I can get possible to plug into that archive so that people can go and listen and to really understand what things look like on the ground during that whole summer and and especially the month of August, those 2 or 3 weeks in August during the evacuation. Small secondary goal to kind of lead into that and hopefully get some funding out of it is a book which I'm working on right now, which will be called The Last Deployment. I got a book. I landed a book deal with a publisher last August 2024. The plan is to have all the materials in for that by this fall and published in August 2026 for the 5th anniversary. That's the plan. So I'm just trying to get more and more interviews that I can plug into there so I can tell as complete a story as possibly can. But yeah, the overall goal is the archive, and then secondary goals, which depend on the time if I'm doing an interview or not, kind of become the primary goals. Is just giving these men and women an opportunity to tell their story to someone who's actively listening and really trying to understand them as best I can. I mean, I'm a Marine myself, military veteran, so I think I'm in a pretty good position to offer that. I hope so. It's been going well so far, and just give them a chance to lay out their story, as I said, for someone who's listening and offer kind of therapeutic experience. Though I'll be the first to admit I'm not a licensed therapist in any kind of way. Just as kind of like how we were talking in our messages before this, just the therapeutic power of storytelling is something I very, very, very strongly believe in, and we can get into some of that later on if you want. Um, and also just bringing these people together eventually. Like I hope to one day all the people that I've interviewed to get together in some kind of reunions or a series of reunions with the different units that were there or with everybody all together, just to bring them back together. Somebody who's not just served around the same time, but who's gone through this deployment together, whether they knew each other at the time or not, which most of them did not, because getting out of the military physically, things can get pretty rough. I kind of talk about that from my own experience, like getting out of the military. You're around the people you are in your platoon, your squad, your section, your company every day, 20 every day for months and years on end. You hate some of them sometimes, but once you get out, you really miss them. You miss the camaraderie. You miss the the talks down at the smoke pit, in the bricks, on the ramp, or wherever, in the office, wherever. And then you're not around that anymore very suddenly. I mean, the military does put some effort into like, helping you get out, help you tradition, but at the same time, it still comes up pretty suddenly because you don't realize that you don't have it anymore until you all of a sudden don't have it. And it's rough. But yeah.
Yeah, if I could take a moment to come back to a couple of points that you've made so that listeners are also clear. The context for the last deployment project is the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so you have extended an invitation to any service member. Are you also including people who were in support of the mission, or does the person have to be a service member?
It can be people who are in support of the mission as
Okay.
well. I would love to talk to like State Department individuals. I've messaged back and forth with Sam Aronson a little bit in the last year. Obviously, he has a whole book written about his experience. So,
Yeah.
and but yeah.
So you are wanting to capture as many stories as possible about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which occurred in 2021. You have a particular focus on a few weeks in August. Um, you have a personal connection to many of the Marines who were there. Um, and and so you have probably likely interviewed all of the Marines that you know of or are on your way to interviewing them. And you've done 67 interviews, which is an incredible number of interviews. As I give a hat tip to you. Just I mean that's significant in terms of these are resource intensive endeavors, particularly with time and coordination. And so that is incredible that you have reached 67 interviews at this point. Um, and the interviews are they open ended? Do you have a time limit, or can someone sit down with you and talk as much as they want?
I know technically just talking like the more disciplined side of it with oral history stuff, I think the time was suggested usually is about 2 hours be the max. Um, I never really started doing that, and I try not to. Obviously, when I sit down with someone, with one of these service members or anyone or someone who's involved, I we know what we're there for. We know the subject matter that we're going over, but at the same time, I don't really put constraints on it as far as time goes. Like I tell everybody, like, hey, I'm here as long as you want to be here. We could be here for an hour and then come back and finish up, or we can be here for 2 hours. And if we get everything done in 2 hours, that's cool. If not, we'll come back and finish it up then. And the longest interview, single interview that I've done is about 6 hours and 45 minutes.
Was that over the course of one time, or did you take breaks?
That was one interview.
Wow, that is intense for both of you. I don't think I've ever. I've had some long interviews, but that is a record. I think that's the longest interview I have ever heard about. That's like a work day.
Yeah. The longest interview I had before that was about 6.5 hours or a little over 6.5 hours, and that was split between 3 sessions.
So, had you done oral history interviews as an undergraduate, or how did you think about like the method that you were going to use for this particular project?
Well, as an undergrad, I was just an English major, so I was doing a lot of writing, not a lot of talking. Creative writing concentration, so I was in a lot of creative writing classes, just writing short stories, other things like that. Went back in, I'll say 2014, 2015, I thought I was going to be a writer. That was my original plan. And then 2015 timeframe, I started thinking about the Marine Corps and military in general. Excuse me. And then, yeah, at the end of 2016, like I said, I graduated on a Saturday. Tuesday, I was in Paris Island. And so I don't really have a whole lot of prior experience as far as thinking about how I was going to do it. A lot of that came from Dr. Finley's influence and his guidance. And then at the same time, I just thought about being a Marine, being an infantryman, and just remembering the way that we interacted when we were back at the barracks, the way we talked. That was that's like the primary guide to doing all this. So when we sit down and do the interviews, I talk to them the same as I would if we were hanging out by the smoke pit in the barracks. Yeah.
I am curious about what led to you uh, going into the Marine Corps. It seems like that you are heading in the direction in terms of creative writing. Um, I think I could make some assumptions about why you went in, or maybe why at the timing, but I don't know what prompted that decision.
I'll take a guess at one of your assumptions, and it's kind of like, well, I get this English degree, concentrating on creative writing. What am I actually going to do with it to make money when I get out? And that was definitely a thought that ran through my head. A big factor, though, is kind of like ever since high school, the military had always kind of been on my mind. I remember one of my buddies from high school, uh, we had this plan that we were going to, when we both graduated, we were going to go into the Marine Corps together. Unfortunately, he did not graduate when he was supposed to. He later got his GED, which the Marine Corps does not take GEDs. And then obviously, when I graduated high school, I went right into college. Didn't think about the military again for a while. And then come 2015 time frame, there was some stuff that was going on in the world at the time. The end of 2014, going into 2015, being the rise of ISIS. Uh, Pretty sure in early 2015, I think they were pretty close to the gates of Baghdad itself. And I was convinced at that point that Baghdad was going to fall. And with that, the rest of Iraq, we'd have to go back in there and clear it out, just like we did with Saddam and his party back in 2003. And I was thinking I wanted to be a part of that. And it was kind of just thinking like, if I don't do it now, I'll regret not doing it because I know I could have done it. So it was kind of all of those factors coming into play, and which ended up me enlisting technically. I signed the paperwork, I think, in April or May 2015, and I spent the next year in the delayed entry program, finally leaving in May 2016.
I heard you talking about when you're now in grad school, you're out of the Marine Corps, you're in grad school. It's 2021 and the withdrawal from Afghanistan is happening, and you felt angry about it, but you also felt that you were being left out, or that there was a part of you that wanted to be there with your Marines. Can you talk about that in a little more context?
Yeah, sure. And not so much angry. Like, I don't remember ever feeling any real anger at the time, at least not that situation in particular. Uh, it was really just the idea of like you said, being left out, or really in my head, taking myself out of the equation because I voluntarily separated from the Marine Corps back in 2020. And just the idea that these guys who I was in charge of for a time, that I was responsible for them for a time, that they're going through this thing and I'm not there with them to help them get through it. Not that I'm not, especially getting into situations that they had to witness and things that they had to be a part of. I'm not going to try and say, oh, I would have acted a certain way like this, or I would have done this thing instead of this thing. I'm not going to play that game. But just them being there, me not being there, and knowing that they didn't have an extra set of hands, they didn't have an extra set of eyes or an extra rifle on the wall. That it's been described to me as a kind of survivor's guilt whenever I talk about it. Because same time, it's like all the guys that I knew personally, uh, they came back fine. They weren't wounded. They obviously they weren't killed. Unlike the 13 brothers and sisters that we lost at Abbey on 26th. But yeah, that's how it's been described to me, as a sense of survivor's guilt. And I've gotten over most of it, I think. There's still part of it that I think will always be there. And I think a lot of service members, especially infantrymen, whether it's the Marines or the Army, kind of feel that way. It's like when you're a part of that culture, you're a part of that lifestyle, and then you're not anymore, regardless of however your time actually was when you were there. Because a lot of my Marine Corps experience in the early days, I'll say like within the first year that I was in the Marine Corps, I did not have a good time. And but I really do miss it. And a few guys that I've been interviewing recently are talking about, oh yeah, I'm going back into the Army, or oh yeah, I'm going back. Like a guy I was just interviewing Tuesday, he's going back into the Marine Corps. As that thought always crosses my mind, but I don't know. I think that part of my life is over. I think I'm going on to hopefully bigger and better things, using my talents in another way So, and then my wife being pregnant as well. We got our child on the way next month, and then going into the graduate program. I think, yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
I can definitely see how um your thoughts in 2021 about wanting to be there, and not being there, not being able to lend an extra rifle or an extra set of hands has helped fuel and inspired you to amplify the voices of and stories of those who were there. I mean, it's very clear to me that not only do you have an academic link to these oral histories, but personally you're this is your passion. You're very motivated, and it seems like you feel a real sense of commitment and duty, to ensure that these stories make it out to the rest of the world. It also seems unique. I don't know, because I'm not a historian, so maybe you can shed more light on this, but it seems that your project, within the oral history context, is unique because it's happening in a relatively short period of time after the actual events. Most of the oral histories that I have watched or listened to occurred decades after. I've listened to many that are related to Vietnam veterans, for example, or people who were victims of the Holocaust, and the interview itself is like decades after. Do you know if this is one of the a project that sits sort of outside the norm in terms of the period of time that's elapsed?
uh, Generally speaking, I would say so. I know there was another professor that I had at Southeastern who she was trying to do an oral history project of her own for veterans of recent wars, mostly documenting veterans of the global war on terror, and actually did an interview for her, well, with her for that, and kind of going back to an earlier question of like informing like my methodology and stuff like that going into the actual interviews. My experience doing that interview directly informs like how I do the interviews that I do, and just make a quick point there. Uh, there was a time limit for that interview, and I felt like I had a lot more to say, but time was up, and so I kind of cleaned up for that. And I didn't like that, and also just some of the questions I can't remember exactly. I have to go back and listen to the interview again. But yeah, that kind of informed that experience informed my methodology as well. It's like, okay, this is what I liked about it, this is what I didn't like about it, so this is what I'm going to do when I do my own interviews. But sorry, what was the question again? Sorry.
Uh, no, I think you've answered it. I was just curious if you um, were aware of any other oral histories that were occurring in such close time proximity to the events. I mean, it's you started doing these within 1 year of the withdrawal, and now it's been 4 years. Um, it seems it seems significant for the because of the recency of events, so people's memories are more clear, and their thoughts about, I think, the events are probably also more raw because it's in such a close time proximity. um it also seems like the the act of storytelling is important, and we exchanged a couple of messages around this particular topic, that the sharing of one's story or a narrative or storytelling sort of broadly is can be a wonderful opportunity for people to frame their experiences, and there's sort of a catharsis that can occur through the act of sharing stories. And you alluded to this earlier, maybe actually you stated it directly. I'd like to hear about your experience as being a listener and what that's like for you to be the hearer of these stories.
That's an experience that I think has changed over time. Because obviously in the beginning I knew very little, if anything at all. And even just doing the 10 interviews that I did in late 2022, a lot of it to me was, it was hard to wrap my head around, shocking in a lot of ways. Like one of the first things that I heard that really ticked me off about the whole thing was, especially considering it was my junior Marines, uh, that they were getting shot at, especially shot at on a regular basis. And obviously that's something the news was not reporting on or even mentioning. That really ticked me off and made me, as far as like talking about that kind of survival skill from before, that really triggered that for sure. And it's just because the subject matter, most of it, there's some good stories every now and again. There's some funny stories every now and again. I mean, what do you expect from a bunch of young people who are in whatever situation that they're in? There's always going to be at least some of them that are trying to make the best out of it in terms of like trying to make a joke or just making it a little more bearable, not only for themselves, but for everybody around them. But just a lot of the stories they're not great to hear. And it's a lot of stories of especially families and children who are going through unimaginable suffering, trying to escape a life that has been taken from them in hopes that they'll get a new one. And seeing, not just seeing, but also hearing, because you hear it in their tone of voice a lot of the time as well, what this is doing to the men and women who had to witness all of that and participate in, or be denied participation in some cases. I mean, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't mess with me a little bit, but the thing that scares me a lot more than that is hearing all of these stories and then becoming kind of jaded and then not being able to connect to them empathetically. That really scares me. I don't think that's happened, or at least not yet. I hope it never does. But that's one of the things that concerns me. And it's just while I'm listening to them, making sure that they know that I'm plugged into whatever it is they're saying, that I can listen to them go on for, I mean, I've had a couple people, they went on for nearly 2, 3 hours. Like I asked them a question in the beginning, 2, 3 hours later, I haven't said a word. They just been going, 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 and then be able to process all that in my head and then go back and be like, yeah, well, you mentioned this a while ago. Can we go into that a little more? You mentioned this a little while. Can you go into that a little bit more? And just, and especially doing the interviews as long as they are, it obviously you're 3, 4 hours in, it, it gets hard at that point mentally as well as physically. Even though all you're doing is just sitting there and listening, you, your brain's doing a lot.
Yeah, are you doing the interviews are online, right? Or you're also doing them in person?
I would love to do them in person. That was one of the original goals when I first started the project, was to find support and find funding to where I could do that. Unfortunately, that has not panned out. But so yeah, pretty much all the interviews that I've done so far have been online, and that's one thing that, I mean, it's the best way that I can do it right now with the with what money I have and what time I have. But I really want, so there's sometimes I'll be doing an interview with a person who's like, I really wish I was there in the room with them. Like I was talking to He's a gunnery sergeant now. He was a staff sergeant at the time in the Marine Corps, telling these couple of stories that he witnessed in and around Northgate. And long story short, he was having an extremely difficult time telling those stories. And I had to sit there and watch him, basically a grown man my age, fellow Marine, break down and cry for about 5 to 10 minutes straight as he was trying to compose himself. That was that's one of the things I think about. Yeah, I just wish I could have been there in person. I'm not sure what I would have done differently, but just having that physical presence there with him, you know.
Yeah, it's hard to do this type of work online because you're right. Just being in a physical space with someone can provide a certain level of comfort, even if you're not doing anything. You're just there. When you were describing some of the context for not becoming jaded, you said something I wanted to ask about, which was about families, young families suffering. Are you talking about Afghani families, or you're talking about the families of the veterans who have come back?
In that particular context I was discussing, I was talking about the Afghans trying to come in the gates, and I mean we can get into some of those stories if you want.
Yeah, please. Let's go ahead and transition into talking about the stories that you're hearing about.
Yeah, so one of the first stories that I heard that really rocked me emotionally, I'll say, is I was talking to this guy. He has to remain anonymous, so I won't say his name or what unit he was with. But they got on the ground at the airport, and he was part of a mounted unit, so they were conducting patrols around the airport. Uh, Something I haven't talked about on a podcast before, but you can go listen to the interviews on my Spotify page. So it's not like it's information I've been withholding or anything like that, but conducting those mounted patrols around the airport. Um, what their main task was looking for what they called wall jumpers, people who were trying to get into the airport not through one of the gates, people who were just trying to climb over and jump over the walls. So they were looking for those kind of people, and in the end, they were hoping that they would get to them before the Afghan army did, or the Afghan. I'm pretty sure they were members of the Afghan National Strike Unit, National Strike Unit 01. If you know anything about the Afghan War or heard their name before, they have a very mixed reputation, depending on who you ask. Uh, Very positive in terms of their efficiency in their operations, but also in their brutality and things that they're willing to do in executing those operations, even towards civilian populations, their own civilian population. And one of the first stories he told me was, and other guys from his unit told me these same stories, so I know for a fact it happened. At least I'm confident in their testimony that it happened. Uh, there was this young couple that they had identified. They were making a movement to go get them. Then they got halted because the Afghans were going to go do it. So the NSU took their trucks out there. They went and got them, and they had to, and the Marines had to sit in their trucks and watch the NSU beat the crap out of these two, and then they dragged them both behind a wall, and they didn't see it happen, but context clues, they heard a couple of gunshots, and then the NSU guys came back around the corner, laughing, joking, smoking, all that kind of stuff, and the young couple did not. And they told me a couple of stories besides that, but the one that really hit me was their first time at a gate, North Gate specifically. This guy I was talking to, telling the story, his son had been born, his first child, 2 months before they deployed. back in early 2021, and he's talking about the gate, how operations were, what it looked like, things of that nature. And then he gets very coherent, like all of a sudden, and things slow down a little bit. And he talks about hearing a because it's a whole crowd of people outside Northgate, and they're all screaming, yelling, trying to get the soldiers and the Marines to let him in, or screaming in pain because they're getting caught in the city wire, they're getting trampled by other people in the crowd, getting pushed, shoved, punched, all that kind of thing. Above all of that, he hears this one woman in particular screaming. And while he's locking, his ears are locking in on that, he sees this little white bundle start moving through the crowd. And he hears a baby screaming, and it's coming from that bundle. And it's coming through the crowd towards the barbed wire, towards him. He realizes what it is. It's a baby. They're trying to give me a baby. He starts shaking his head, making hand motions, saying, no, 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 don't give me the baby. Don't give me the baby. Keep it with the mother. Gets to the last guy on the opposite side of the barbed wire that he's on, and tosses it over. Obviously, he catches it because he's not just going to let it hit the ground. Catches it. It's a baby. It's like bright red, just burning up in the sun, plus all the body heat that's around there. Because I think, at least just looking at the weather for the time period on a couple of different weather websites that I want to look up, it was like mid 80s, upper 80s. So not awful as that part of the world can get sometimes is in terms of heat, but you think about the mass of hundreds and thousands of bodies all in one place and all the body heat that generates. And then around that time, there was a breach in the wire. So him and the other guys have to, while he's holding on to this baby, he him and everybody that's around him has to try and push the crowd back, literally fight the crowd back. And at one point, he realizes that his RCO, his rifle scope, is kind of pressing on the baby a little hard. So he swings his rifle around behind him. Again, he's looking to see if he can hand his baby off to anybody, but they're all in the same condition that he's in. The crowd's trying to break through. They have to like literally punch, kick, elbow, headbutt people to get him back. That's bad enough in and of itself, while trying to maintain uh, proper handling on your weapon system as well as trying to hold that baby. And then at some point, he didn't realize it, but once the crowd finally kind of got back and he's got it more or less under control, he realizes the baby's not crying anymore. He realizes the baby's not moving anymore. And then he realizes that, well, he sees that it's not red anymore. It's like kind of palish, maybe a little bluish color, and baby has passed away. He didn't know what to do with it, and kind of a touching moment. He hands it back to the crowd, and the bundle gets passed back, and he assumes it got back to the mother at one point, but that was his introduction to everything that was going on. And so a few hours later, they get off that gate. They go back to where they're bivouacking, where they're staying, and he just sits in his room and with sits in the room that he's in with his head in his hands, and he's like, "What are we doing?" And he commented that the estimated age of that baby was about the same as the son that he had just left when they deployed. And that, yeah, that really messed with them. And I've heard a few other stories that are very similar to that one since then.
This is really heavy emotional um content and experiences that you are capturing. And I, I mean, outside of maybe therapy or a person speaking to a religious leader or maybe their family, and then maybe their peers. I don't know where these stories are actually having a place outside of your project. And they're really important stories, and these small moments that aren't so small, but they like time is standing still, and I cannot even imagine what this person must have been going through, like trying to manage, on one hand, keeping this baby safe and being aware of the weapon in the crowd, and the heat, and being vigilant and trying to make sure, ensuring safety. It's really overwhelming. Is this type of overwhelm a theme that you're seeing across the interviews?
Especially for those who are at most of the gates, yes. North Gate, East Gate. I've only had a couple of interviews, unfortunately, with guys who were at Abbey Gate, a handful from South Gate, which was technically South Gate originally was like the main entrance to the airport itself, especially the civilian side of the airport, which got turned into a gate to try and let people in during the evacuation. But yeah, North Gate, East Gate, and Abbey Gate, especially, there's a lot of stories, whether I've heard them in interviews or just being around the veterans who were there, have told me. It's like you said, it's a lot of very overwhelming stuff, and trying to, it's impossible to process it at the time, and it's very difficult to process it later, especially when you get into like the culture that exists within the military. And I'll say just from my own experience being a Marine, the culture that really especially exists on the Marine side, especially the infantry side, whether Army or Marine Corps, makes, I don't know, I'm not sure how I will word it.
Can you say more about the culture, specifically in the Marine Corps? I'm actually writing an article at the moment, having to do with the Devil Dog Fountain, and I am getting into some of the cultural aspects within the Marine Corps in order to offer some analysis on why the fountain is so magnetic for Marines, and I really welcome your thoughts on articulating some of the cultural aspects within the Marine Corps that are unique to the Marine Corps.
Trying not to put it too simply, it's just what's on my head right now thinking about it, especially when it comes to really experiencing any kind of hardship, especially on the infantry side. It's kind of like, oh, you're having a hard time? So is everybody else. What makes you special? Suck it up. Deal with it. Go. You know?
So then the idea is that if someone's suffering, you're in the Marine Corps, someone's suffering, join the club, everyone's suffering. And so is there a sense that the individual, whether it's suffering or questioning, has to be suppressed in order to maintain lethality?
I think that's part of it. And I just know that seeking help, I can't speak too much about on the Army side, though I've talked to a lot of Army guys doing this. I know it's, especially on the infantry side, it's very similar. But talking from the Marine side, Marine infantry side, it's like if you actually seeking help in the Marine Corps while you're in the infantry, while you're in active duty, it's not easy. Not in the sense that you can't find the resources. You can find the resources very easily, and your command, as long as they're halfway decent, which most of them are that at least, they'll have the resources like up on like walls, whether in the barracks, in the office, down at the ramp. So you know where you need to go. But if you go there, this stigma gets attached to you. Like if you go seek mental health, or you go seek some kind of medical help, or if you go to like, if you have like a drinking problem, you go to Alcoholics Anonymous and you miss out on things. I'll put it very bluntly, sorry for cursing, but you get the label of shitbag pretty easily. Not saying that's how I felt about guys who did that, or the guys that around me felt about guys who did that, but that's the overall attitude that kind of surrounds those people once they do that, unfortunately. And I saw it happen a lot. doing these interviews. I've heard that happen to a lot of guys. Like one guy that I talked to who was from my old company, my old battalion, Second LAR. He got back from that deployment. He starts drinking a lot, like a lot, to help him sleep at night. He recognized that it was affecting his ability to do his job. It was affecting his relationship with his buddies around him. And so he went and sought help. He talked to his team leader. He's like, "Yeah, man, good to go. We'll make sure you get the help that you need because we want you 100% in the fight." He's like, "All right, cool." So he's on his way to Alcoholics Anonymous on base. I can't remember the name of the building. I know if I went to Lejeune right now, I could find it. I'm pretty sure I can't remember the name of it, but he's getting set up for that. Trying to prevent himself from drinking, he starts taking medication to help him sleep. He ends up taking a medication that is federally legal, so he wasn't taking anything illegal, but it was not authorized under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So he takes that medication. There's a urinalysis test that comes around, which happens every month, every couple of months, every quarter. In most Marine units, I know that I'm pretty sure it was once a quarter for my battalion, at least. I'm sure other battalions are the same, or at least close to it. Because he's taking that medication, he pops on the piss test, and then he gets labeled a shitbag. The company first sergeant that they had at the time was not the same first sergeant that they had on deployment. It was not the same first sergeant that was there when they left. Starts calling him a shitbag and starts paperwork to get him processed out of the Marine Corps, basically kicked out of the Marine Corps as a administrative separation, which is not good to have on your record. And thankfully, months later, he was able to get that upgraded to an other than honorable, which is, I think, other than honorable, or I think discharge under honorable conditions. I forget exactly, but basically, he's in a lot better. It looks a lot better now than what it did when he initially was, unfortunately, kicked out. Which is, he was just trying to seek help. He was trying to better himself, realized that he had an issue, tried to fix it. His team leader tried to help him. And then when it came to higher leadership, they kind of just said, "You're a shitbag. We don't want you here. Get out."
Yeah, it seems like an ambush, in some way where someone is putting trust in the someone's word and the system, and then when that then someone can be vulnerable, comes forward, is trying to work through the proper channels, and then finds out that that vulnerability is now going to be punished in some way. I that is, I mean, from a psychological standpoint, that's really damaging. And it seems like some of so it seems like the one of the themes from what you're hearing through these oral history interviews has to do um with feeling ambushed.
Yeah, and it's just, and even when they do get to use these services, especially when it comes to mental health, sometimes they're not always cracked up what they used to be, what they probably should be. Even on the Army side, talking about guys coming back from that 2021 deployment, seeking mental health. Sometimes the people that they have in those positions to act as therapists, or uh, every battalion has a chaplain, which I think is like a religious leader for the battalion, that are supposed to be there for not just for both the moral and the mental welfare of their soldiers or their Marines, whoever they're over, airmen, sailors, whichever. And you don't always have the caliber of individual that you should probably have in that position. I know there was I forget which battalion it was. Actually, no, it was one of the battalions from the 82nd Airborne, and they had actually been in Afghanistan, I think, since March of that year. And then come August 15th and August 16th, when the airport was being overrun, their battalion chaplain just up and left. The first plane that was available, he got on and he was gone, just left them. And they, understandably so, never really forgave him for that. So when it comes to their time that they finally get out, they're not going to that person for any kind of mental health or moral support.
Is it the case that mental health uh, is or discussions around lack of mental health support, is that a theme that has come out of your interviews? I mean, is it something that you're seeing, or are you placing like all of this in a context of your experience in the Marine Corps and those Marines that you know and the oral history interviews, or are you seeing this mental health like broad theme emerge out of the interviews that you've done, the 67 that you've done?
It definitely plays a part. Not everybody talks about it directly, but yeah, it definitely plays a part. And I mean, there's some guys who have really hard struggles with it, and there's some guys who don't struggle with it at all. There's some guys like the guy that I've interviewed recently, even one of my junior Marines, he was very apathetic about the whole situation. He's like, we went there, we were told to go there, we had a job to do, we did it as best as we could with what we had. We got a lot of people out, came home, and carried on with life. And I think part of what plays into the mental health, I think, is a maturity thing. Not saying that anybody that was there was immature, just saying that those with more life experience were able to handle it. Typically, were able to handle it better than those guys who were there being 18, 19, 20 years old.
Yeah, that makes sense. And mental health is interesting because it's very individualized. So we can make uh, some general statements or look at kind of symptoms of mental health, a diagnosis, for example, and say this looks the same across the population, but there are individual characteristics also. And so I don't think that within the mental health profession, we can make concrete even predictions about who may go through one situation and have one experience psychologically versus another. So it is kind of like a puzzle piece. Is actually one of the reasons that I have stayed in the research I'm doing, remained in studying pilgrimages, because I did interview several people as when I was doing my PhD, who were military veterans and had gone on pilgrimages, and some were religious, some weren't. But it did strike me that pilgrimages could be some type of intervention that might be specifically useful for military veterans. Primarily because it's not talk therapy. You're not sitting down in an office like in this like tight environment, which doesn't necessarily work for a lot of people. A lot of people just it's not their jam to sit in therapy. But going out, on a trail for several weeks. One prior Marine I interviewed, walked the Appalachian Trail when he was leaving the Marine Corps. This was not for my PhD; this was for a later study. But he talked about just having the decompression time of having. So I think he walked the AT for 5 weeks, and he had this time to like process what had happened in the Marine Corps, and he was going into grad school, so he had actually left Afghanistan, come back to the United States, and had a very like he had this 5 week period of time between the time he was leaving the Marine Corps and starting grad school, and so he decides to walk the AT. And just like being out in nature and having time to think and process and think about what's next. And since that point, I've interviewed a lot of veterans who have used some type of pilgrimage as like this rite of passage out of military service. And so I do think that there's something that could be uniquely helpful for active duty military members, but also veterans and those who are in transition, to do a pilgrimage, because I do think some of the mental health issues can be addressed through this in a way that's different than like traditional talk therapy.
Yeah, and I see a lot of that going on, especially for GWAT veterans, which I think is extremely positive. And there is something about being outside and being amongst nature that is very beneficial. I know that's mentioning a guy who walked the Appalachian Trail when I was getting out of the Marine Corps and wrapping up my master's. That was a plan that I had in my head. I was like, man, I want to graduate, then I just want to go hike the Appalachian Trail. And unfortunately, I didn't do that. I don't know if it's better that I didn't or that I should have anyway. There was a lot of other factors going on at the time that kind of encouraged me not to do that, not to do so. And then I know one program that I know about, Mighty Oaks Foundation. One of the guys that I interviewed, Greg Fritsch, when he came home, he had a very, very, very difficult time. Uh, Still does every now and again. He has his good days, he has his bad days, but for the most part, he's good. And but again, he really, really struggled, and then it got to a point where him and his wife went and they got in touch with Mighty Oaks, which is another program run by a Marine veteran, recon Marine veteran runs that. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I apologize. But and that's helped him a lot with him processing the deployment that deployment, as well as other things that are going on. He's still in the Marine Corps now. Pretty sure he should be wrapping up recruiting duty soon, which will be a good thing for him. I feel like a lot of people think recruiting duty is a pretty easy gig. It's not. Talking to a lot of recruiters, especially spending a year in the delayed entry program myself back in 2015. Recruiters have a very rough life. It is just because you get to be out amongst the civilian population is actually probably, it sounds worse than it is. But yeah, just being out in nature and just having that time to decompress. And I know for me, when I got out, the first thing I did when I left Camp Lejeune, drove straight down to Florida where my wife was going to school at the time, and she was my fiance at the time, and I just stayed down there for a month. That really helped. And then I hear a lot of guys reference like, oh yeah, the guys that fought World War II, when they were coming home, they had to come home on ships, and they were on there for weeks or maybe months at a time. They had all that time to just be around each other and talk about things and decompress about things. And that's why they don't have all these struggles that GWAT veterans or more contemporary veterans or veterans of more contemporary conflicts have. And I think there's truth in that, but I also think what complicates stuff, especially when you talk about the GWAT, is the causes that you're fighting for with the global war on terror are not as direct as they were in the Second World War. I think this is my opinion, just what I know of the Second World War compared to other conflicts of the 20th century, especially nowadays, that it's very easy looking at the Second World War. It's like, okay, Nazis, bad guys, go get rid of them. Imperial Japan, doing a lot of bad things, go stop them, go get rid of them. Pretty cut and dry. Like, and plus the fact that the United States was attacked in 1941 helped, stuff like that. It was just very clear of like what you were fighting for and why you were there. You get to 2003, onward, I would say, becomes a lot harder to keep that in mind, and the way that those, not just the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan developed politically, the way they developed strategically, it just made it a lot harder to keep that picture. It's like I was 7 years old when 9/11 happened. We were living in Northern Virginia at the time, maybe 30-minute drive at most from the Pentagon. School shut down. I was in seventh grade. I remember seeing on the TV that morning, we were walking down the hall, and I saw on one of the TVs in the office the North Tower on fire. And I remember thinking to myself, very innocent thought for a 7-year old child, I wonder if the firefighters have a ladder tall enough to reach that. But yeah, kids were getting called out of class because they had family that worked in the Pentagon or worked in Arlington, worked in DC, even some that worked up in New York, worked around the Trade Center. Some of those kids came back to class. Some of them got held, I don't know where, until the end of the day. And then, so it's like in the beginning days, especially in Afghanistan, it's like, okay, we were attacked on 9/11. Who are the people that attacked us? Where are they? They're in Afghanistan. Cool, go get them. And then over time, that just became more muddled, and that's a whole thing that I'm going to try to avoid getting into. But yeah, so but basically what I'm saying is that makes it harder to process as well. Is that the objectives weren't clear, the goals you were fighting for weren't clear in like the general sense. The individual always has what they're fighting for. But in talking about more generally, it becomes a little bit more difficult to, I guess, elaborate on and understand maybe.
Well, I think to your point, for you and for other young service members who grew up I mean, for the majority of your life, we were engaged in a war. I think it's a very unique situation for a person to grow up. The country is at war, so the commentary is all around. The actions are known. Uh, at least the ones that we're seeing, on through the media are known. People are talking about it. You hear about it at school. You study about it, and then you find yourself in it. And so that's a really kind of unique situation that can lead to all kinds of disillusionment, because you literally grew up in the context of the war happening and then are now in it. And so there is, I mean, for many young service members and veterans, they don't ever remember a time when the United States wasn't engaged in a martial conflict. And so these big questions about why or about what we're doing or what the purpose, they've already framed your existence. And then you find yourself actually in a different role, in that you are now a Marine or a soldier in the midst of the conflict. So I think it does provoke a different, like it's just it makes sense, I think, why younger people would be struggling more intensely with what is happening, because it is literally their life that this has been unfolding in.
Yeah, I know that was an observation that I can't remember if it was me that made it or a buddy of mine that made it when we were coming back uh, June, early July to 2019 from our deployment. One of us was like, "Hey man, when we get back, we're gonna have boots that weren't even born when 9/11 happened." And that was kind of like that blew both of our minds for a minute. The fact that people were being born and now they're going into the military and they weren't even around when this conflict started. They don't have a firsthand experience. Me, not that I had much of one. I was 7 years old. I didn't understand geopolitics or foreign policy or anything of that nature. but it's the fact that they don't have that direct experience of understanding why we're in conflict in the places that we are doing the things that we're doing. And that was true for a lot of the Marines and soldiers, airmen, sailors that were in HKIA that participated in the evacuation. A lot of those guys, that was their, a lot of those men and women, that was their first deployment. And a lot of them, that was their only deployment. It's a hell of a way to climax and cap off your military career, whether it's 4 or 5 years, which is most of them is only 4 or 5 years, some 3. But yeah, just the way that deployment was compared to everything that they had heard about growing up and everything that they learned about going through the training cycle. I mean, when I went through the training cycle in 2016, my combat charters at infantry training battalion, all of them except for one, maybe two, were combat veterans. And then telling me and the other trainees stories about their time in Afghanistan, their time in Iraq, whether that be in Fallujah, that be in Sangin, and then a lot of those guys, or at least enough of them, are still around by the time these new trainees are going through. These guys that are going on their first deployment in when they're going through the training cycle in 2018, 2019, 2020, some of them, they're hearing those stories and they get there. And then some of the senior guys like the staff NCOs, the staff sergeants, gunnery sergeants, sergeant first classes that have those multiple deployments under their belt. Like there was one sergeant that I had talked to on with the 82nd, and he had deployed to Afghanistan before. And the entire time that he's there, he's trying to be an example to his Joes, his soldiers that are under him. And at the same time, he's like, "This is not what deployment is usually like. This is not what it's supposed to be like. This is something completely different. We're just gonna have to figure it out together." And when you hear that from, not that they were doing the wrong thing, I think they were actually doing the right thing, but just hearing how difficult the situation is, even for guys who've gone through a deployment before, even a combat pump before, it's it just makes you wonder, like, how am I going to process this? How am I going to deal with all of this? You know?
Yeah, that is, it is unique to have like second generation now people who are serving in the same conflict. Where you're saying, um, yeah, at boot camp even, uh, yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy to think that we were still in the same conflict, and then you, and your uh, cohort, uh, or contemporaries are then serving in the exact same conflict. That's a long time to be at war.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have, as a writer certainly, but also as a historian, you could have taken a deep dive into an archive and written about the global war on terror from many, many different points. Um, for you, why is the oral history direction the best way to present one angle of this story?
I just think we have the technology, we should use it, and I think we should do it as soon as possible before these stories get lost. And I'm sure you can kind of tell, like, over time, memories change, memories get lost. And talking about the veteran community in particular is just an unfortunate part of it. And I can think of, I think more than 20 that I've heard of, guys just take their own lives. And when they do that, their stories are lost. and you have to rely on others who knew them to try and tell their part of the story, but they don't get to tell it themselves. And since I've been doing this, I know of at least, thankfully, not guys that I've interviewed, but I think more than 20 who had deployed in 2021. Like I was talking to one guy that I interviewed late last year. I was talking to him again earlier, I think a month or two ago. Just last year alone in 2024, he lost 6 friends who took their own lives. I know people talk about the 22 day statistic. I've been having conversations about that with another guy who I trust, and that statistic is over 40 a day. So
Over 40 veterans every day are taking their own lives. That is a sobering number. Wow. I did not realize that 40 service members or veterans every day take their own lives. We have to address this.
I hope what I do helps to prevent some of those. And I've talked to a couple of guys, like Greg Fritsch being one of them, another one, Ian Forrest. When they came home, within several months of them being home, or within a year of them being home, they came really close to taking their own lives. And it was one circumstance or another that prevented them from doing so. For Ian, he was just drinking one night, and I don't know if he was just being funny or what. He put a loaded gun to his head. Thankfully, he did it in front of his wife, who was very upset, took the gun from him, and then when he sobered up the next morning, he called the cops on himself. When got professional help, and he's doing a lot better now. Did some volunteer work at a veterans museum up in. Pretty sure he's actually, yeah, he's in New Hampshire. So did some work at a veterans museum, and he's doing a lot better now, thank God. And actually got to see him in person in first week of April up in Quantico. He's doing awesome, and I love to hear that. I know for a fact, because he's communicated to me, that him sitting down and talking to me and telling his story to me really helped. Again, that's what he's told me. And his interview, when I put that out there, that directly influenced Greg Fritsch, who listened to his interview and decided he wanted to do it, and he wanted to do one as well, and talked about, again, that deployment, his struggles afterward. And he came home from recruiting one day. He's sitting in his truck, sitting in the driveway, and on the passenger seat next to him, he has a pistol he's had since he was a kid. Very avid shooter. He's done several competitions with this pistol. He's very, very proficient with it. He loves this gun. He loves just sports shooting. And now he's in the process of thinking of putting it to his head to take his last shot, so to speak. And he's calling people he knows, calling, looking for anyone to answer, just to talk to him and give him a reason not to do it. Finally, he does eventually get in touch with somebody. I won't say. Pretty sure it was his uncle, one of his uncles. Talks to him for a while, and his uncle kind of picked up what he was laying down, even though he wasn't saying it directly. And it was a combination of that, plus he saw the silhouette of his wife in the kitchen window putting his dinner in the microwave. And then that's when he started to finally seek help. Yeah, I recommend his interview a lot, him and Ian's, because those are two for me personally, not that the other interviews haven't been. I don't want to. I don't want to play favorites for any of the interviews that I do because they're all important to me, and I know they're all important to obviously the individuals who told those stories. But those are two that I referenced a lot because it's just the how much they struggled and how open they were about it. And I've had an interview recently with the guy who was with the 10th Mountain in 2021, 4th Battalion, 31st Infantry, 10th Mountain Division. They were in Afghanistan from December 2020, and they were supposed to leave August 16th, 2021. That's the day the airport gets overrun, so obviously they don't leave. They finally get to leave on August 25th, 2021. Well, the next day is the Abbey Gate attack. They had been in country, and their battalion was responsible for closing down many of the bases that were still around in Afghanistan at that time. They've been in country for so long. They finally leave, and then that happens. Their survivor's guilt when it comes to that, or just the feeling that you left the job unfinished. And this one guy that I was talking to, I won't say his name yet until I put his interview out. 20-year veteran, United States Army, joined in 2005. When he got home from that deployment, the way he was describing it to me, he straight up called himself a monster. Given to drinking heavily, treated himself poorly, treated those around him poorly, treated his wife poorly, didn't really interact with his kids. And then finally last year, he he got everything together without. He can tell the story a lot better than I can. That's why I want to put the interview out. Hopefully sooner than later. He can tell the story a lot better than I can. But last year, he finally things got back together, and he's a lot better now. And I hope him telling the story. And he wanted to tell the story as well. Him and Ian and Greg all wanted to tell their stories because they knew the struggles that they had, and they hoped that by telling their stories that they would help others as well. And I think they have.
The work you're doing is really important. And the work that your interviewees are doing is really important. And there's, I mean, it's very clear that the personal impact of this is significant, but I think in sharing these stories, we all become better people. I mean, hopefully they'll lead to other types of outcomes. One being that people know they have a place to share their story. So that's one important outcome, and hopefully people who are decision makers, policy makers, those who have power to do something different upon hearing these stories will make different choices. How can people find you?
I'm on Instagram. Uh, it we're like at the dot last dot deployment underscore projects. You can find me on Instagram that way. I'm on LinkedIn. Just look up the last deployment project. I'm on Facebook. Look up the last deployment project. Uh, Email me at the dot last dot deployment dot project at gmail.com. I haven't made a website yet. I want to, hoping I can find some funding for that to do that, where I can actually start uploading these interviews and creating the archive that I want to make instead of just uploading them to Spotify right now, which, yeah, it's really the main place where you can go to the interviews right now is on Spotify. Just search the Last Deployment Project. I also have them linked to Apple Music, Amazon Music. I don't think Google Podcasts is a thing anymore, but it was on there. And a couple other podcast websites, I think, which I think leads to some confusion because I think just the way that I do the interviews, being very conversational in the interviews, and uploading them on these podcasting websites. A lot of people call and it's like, yeah, so how's your podcasting? And I'm like, I mean, these are serious interviews that I'm doing. I mean, I'm trying to every now and again be lighthearted with the guys and be conversational with them, but these are serious interviews that are going to be very historically valuable for posterity and future.
I hope someone or some people listening or watching will fund this. I hope that the work you're doing is like, it's so important. Important doesn't even seem like the right word. It's significant, and I recognize how these projects sometimes can just fall away because of lack of funding. And I I hope that doesn't happen. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen. I can see your personal motivation to keep at this, but you do need some type of infrastructure in order to get this into a digital archive. Um, Thank you so much for taking time to talk with me about the last deployment project and sharing your heart about this, and sharing about the lives of people who were greatly impacted over the last couple of years, and may continue to be impacted in the future. I think it definitely sets the stage for some of what I've been hearing about in terms of pilgrimages, whether those are battlefield pilgrimages that are occurring um, to Bella Wood or the Devil Dog Fountain, where I've spent a lot of time, or pilgrimages along the Camino or along the AT. I think I have a better understanding of where GWAT veterans are coming from, and so I appreciate your time. Thank you, Chris.
No, I appreciate your time as well, 100%. It's again just any opportunity I get to just put the project out there, because the big reason I want the name of it out there is I want the name to reach veterans, especially veterans who were part of the 2021 withdrawal, because I want them to have a chance to, if they want to tell their story. And there's guys that I've talked to, they don't want to tell it just yet, and that's probably fine. I'm not here to force anybody to tell a story. I can definitely give you some encouragement in that direction, because I think it's extremely valuable, and the sooner you do it, the better, not just for yourself, but for obviously on the professional side for the historical record and everything. But yeah, I just want those men and women to know about it and hopefully put enough trust and faith in me to tell their story in a way that people will have a better understanding of who they are as individuals and what they went through in trying to make the best out of an incredibly crappy situation, to put it lightly. Because again, it was a crappy situation. It was the result of failure in terms of foreign policy, but they still managed, in spite of it, they've managed to pull off the largest aerial evacuation. I'm pretty sure the largest aerial evacuation in human history, with 125,000 people who had their lives taken from them in terms of just having a decent life in Afghanistan, not necessarily to the standard that we would know in the West, in the United States or in Europe or anything of that nature, but just having a decent life in their own country. Those people now have a chance to have a better life somewhere else, whether that be in the United States, whether that be in Europe, or who knows where some of them ended up.